6-year absence, Rose returned to Cincinnati in 1984 to take over as player manager. We talked with him recently about his team and his pursuit of Ty Cobb's record.
We know what 4,192 will mean in the record books, but what will it mean to Pete Rose?
Well, it means I got the most hits in the history of baseball, but I don't think it means any more or any less. I hope when I get that record-breaking hit, it wins a baseball game. That's the thing that I'm proud of. I played more winning baseball games than anybody in the history of baseball, and that's what you really play for. Records are just part of the game. Records are something that mounts up because you can hit a baseball and because you're healthy and because you play a long period of time. But the real rewards are what happens in the end as far as who wins and who loses.
You haven't had good weather at the beginning of the season yet. You're the only one on your team to get a base hit in all those games at the beginning of the year. Why were you able to stay hot when everybody else was so cold?
Well, from the time I came back in '84 here, Craig, last year with Cincinnati, I hit 365, and I went to spring training, and I hit 611 for the whole spring training. And, you know, I'm hitting right around 400 now, and I've just been swinging the bat with a lot of confidence, playing with a lot of emotion because of the reaction of the people when I go to bat. It's a lot like Gary Carter. He's playing with a lot of emotion in New York because he's like the savior there, so to speak. And every time he comes out of the dugout, they get on their feet, and I think it makes a player really work hard, really enjoy his job, and really want to do well. And I think that's the same thing with me. And I convinced myself when I went to Philadelphia, when I left the Reds in '78, that I hated to play in the cold weather. But if you're in the Eastern Division, you're going to play in some cold weather. And I just convinced myself that if you win and get a couple hits, you're not as cold as if you go 0 for 4 and you lose the game.
You've been in the dugout for so many years, but when you're actually calling the shots, it must be different. What's been the most difficult part of managing?
I think when you lose a game. I think when you lose a game, Craig, that as a manager, you relive the game on your way home, whereas the baseball player, if you lose the game, you know, you got tomorrow night, you can come right back. But as a manager, you always go over the game and you're saying, well, what happens if I did this, if I did this, if I put this guy in instead of that guy? You really don't second guess yourself, but you just say to yourself, well, I should have did this, right? I didn't do this, and I should have took this pitcher out instead of letting him face that guy. And you sort of take the defeats a lot upon yourself more than you do as a player.
We've talked so much about you, but what about this Reds team? Where do you think it will be finishing this year?
Well, I think we're going to surprise a lot of people. We're not in the strongest division in the world, and I don't mean that and disrespectful to anybody. There's some good teams in this division, but every team in this division has some question marks, and it's just a matter of who's going to answer those question marks. We have a very young pitching staff. I have some veteran players that play every day to do a good job, like your Parkers and your Cedenios, your Osters and your Concepciones and Sotos and people like that. But then I got some Brownings and Willises and Tibbs and Francos and people like that who are very young. But there again, in my 22-year career, Craig, the two biggest changes I've noticed in baseball is one is the salary increases, and two is the maturity of young pitchers who come to the big leagues. Dwight Gooden's no freak. It's just he's a product of constant teaching of how to throw a baseball. And there's a lot of guys that come up today that are in the same boat with Dwight. They don't throw quite as hard as Dwight, but they come up and they're throwing 2-0 breaking balls, 3-1 change-ups, and they just know how to pitch, and they got an idea. And I think that's one of the biggest changes I've seen in baseball is how grown up these kids are coming up to pitch in the big leagues.
Well, Red fans know what to expect from Pete Rose, and maybe we'll get some pleasant surprises from the rest of the team.
Well, we're going to be aggressive. We're going to try to be fundamentally sound. We're going to try to play hard. We're going to have to steal runs because we don't have a lot of home run hitters. But there again, you have to take advantage of what you have. And if we got a lot of guys that can hit and run and steal and take extra bases and be aggressive and make things happen, that's what we're going to do. And all I want my players to do is realize what their capabilities are and then do them on a daily basis. I don't want them to do no more and no less. If a guy runs at first in 4 seconds, I'm not going to ask him to run it 3.5, but we are going to ask him to run it in 4 seconds.
What kind of kid were you growing up? What were you doing? Were you always playing sports? What kind of kid would you say you were?
Well, I played seasonal sports. If it was basketball season, I was playing basketball, and football season, which was my first love, to be honest with you. And, of course, baseball in the summertime. And we didn't have much more to do when I was a kid. You have to remember I'm 44 years old, and it wasn't exactly like kids today. I mean, kids have a lot more to do today when they're away from the arena, so to speak, than I did when I was a kid. And that's all we look forward to is playing baseball, basketball, football, and hockey wasn't a big sport then, or soccer wasn't a big sport then, but the other three major sports were real big.
If football was your main love, how'd you become a baseball player?
Well, I had an uncle who was a scout for the Reds, and I almost went to the University of Tennessee to play football, and I think it was my main sport because my father was a professional football player, and he was the only one that didn't go to college to play for the old Cincinnati Bengals. And he played up to the time he was 42 years old, so he exposed me to sports by dragging me everywhere with him. And I was always the first one to get in the car knowing he was going to play football or going to play softball or going to play basketball. And And you know, I had more talent as a football player, to be honest with you, because I was kind of small. I was a halfback, and my uncle, who was a scout for the Reds, had to convince the Reds that I would mature late, because I was 19 years old and I weighed 150 pounds. And once I signed a professional contract and got into professional baseball, I started growing about 15 pounds a year. So now I'm about 200 pounds.
Of all the collisions you've had in baseball, is the one with Ray Fosse the most typical of a football collision you've ever had?
Well, I guess so. You have a lot of those at home plate, but that was timing. That was on TV, so everybody made a big deal out of it. It was an all-star game. You have a lot of situations where you're breaking up double plays. You know, I sort of play baseball like a football player. I dive for a lot of baseballs, and I just play reckless. And I'm not worried about getting hurt. I think if you think about getting hurt, or you're worried about getting hurt, then you're going to get hurt. And if you go out there and just play the game the way it's supposed to be played and give an extra effort, I don't think you'll get hurt. I just think it's part of the game that gets some aches and pains. It's easy to play this game if you feel 100% all the time, and it takes certain players to go out there with aches and pains and still do the job.
Gary Carter, there are problems, at least in the press, saying that you didn't get along with Gary at Montreal. What happened there?
No, I didn't get along with Gary. The only thing I said bad about Gary, if you want to call it bad, is whoever nicknamed the kid, give him the perfect name, because he's a big teddy bear is what he is. And occasionally he says things that he don't mean the next day, or he's one of these guys that, you know, the press love him because he talks a lot, but a lot of times he says things and they take it wrong. And the way he says it, he really don't mean it, and it gets him in a lot of trouble with his teammates sometimes. But Gary's harmless, and he's a great player, and he's doing a good job for the Mets. And I think that was blown out of contact as far as him and I not liking each other, because I used to take ground balls at first base with him every day, and what I try to do is make him a better player. I try to make him understand that you have to play from the first game to the 162nd game, not just half of them or 3/4 of them or whatever, and I think he learned.